Oh my god. Like, I'm sorry, y'all. I'm starting to think game design is running into a problem. There's always been this idea with role-playing or exploration games of the time in between events. And I think there's been this growing trend of thinking the time between events needs to be as small as possible. I know some games like The Witcher 3 and Zelda like had their numbers, and they would come in actually kind of shockingly small. Like for noticing something you could go and do was around a 35-second time frame. And I think that's getting incorporated into games like this, where all they think of is that number. And they don't realize that in the games that people really like, those are the time between events that you see that you can engage with, and that being exciting. And then you get into games like these that impose events every 30 seconds, especially if it's the same event. I've already done 20 times so far. Like fight goblins, fight harpies. I've done this at minimum 20 times at only a couple of hours into the game. Don't keep imposing that event on me. I've done this. I've done this enough times that I'm not going to enjoy seeing this anymore. Bro just yapping because he's bad at the game. Do you enjoy fighting the goblins 100 times every time you're going on another quest? I can't imagine you enjoy that, Hallfrost. Yeah, they're under the player's control. They are events that you see that you can choose to engage with. With here, I have no choice in these engagements. They just happen at me.
Battle is best avoided here.
Oh, battle's best avoid? I'd love to. But that's not entirely up to me. Now, is it? I'm just saying, this is a thing where this is not the way you want to approach travel. Where travel is a series of 15 forced engagements against the same enemies over and over and over again. That is a level of almost imposed grinding that is very poorly planned out, honestly. You want players to see things and to choose to engage with them. You never want to impose engagement at a rate higher than the choices. I made a choice to go on 3 monster culling missions, and I have now fought more goblins in between fighting goblins than I did spend fighting goblins at the fighting goblins location. It's tedious at the beginning, but gets less grating once you get into it. Okay, so it's bad in the beginning, but once you've played the game enough, it stops being... That is not where the game should be at its most tedious. You want your tedium later. You don't want the game to open with its worst tedium that you have to slog through to get into good stuff. Now, that's not to say you can't make the late game of a game the pinnacle of it. Like, that's not to say the early game can't be worse than the late game. What I'm saying is the early game can't be more tedious. Oh, so it doesn't get less tedious. You're just, like, the tedium is reduced by your relative power levels? That's a choice, I guess. All right. So what is the energy they're going for? Let's actually stop for a minute and discuss and think about what the best way to approach what they're doing here is. So we're encountering a lot of minor fights anytime we're traveling between missions, like a lot of them, an almost oppressive amount of them. So there's a few reasons that could be. First one is a mechanical one. There is the thought process that what they're trying to do is essentially feed you a lot of XP, essentially. Every fight that you win is going to give you XP in the literal sense and XP in like the metaphorical sense, you know, more experience with your tools. So this is a method of trying to essentially power up the player rapidly. Having to go from fight to fight to fight to fight to fight is very quickly in the early game going to get the player a lot of XP to level up with and a lot of experience with their class so they can explore, learn, figure out how to properly fight with it. Those are some of the more mechanically minded ideas behind having that many fights going on. Next, we can think about it in the thematic realm. Like I'm saying, I find it a little bonkers ass crazy that, like, if we look at this map, between this bridge in the city and this bridge in the city, there's this many fights? Because you would expect just the immediate outskirts of a city to be pretty well, like, patrolled, guarded, and defended. But let's just think of it just as the roadways. Let's ignore some of these elements. Thematically, having tons of goblins, harpies, minotaurs, ogres around really gives the impression of quite obviously a dangerous or overrun or wild or, you know, just in some way dangerous world you're in. These are ways to really invoke a sense of constant danger. So that's kind of the thematic idea, is that you're trying to impose this idea of a wild, dangerous world. So we have a mechanical idea behind it, then we have sort of that thematic idea why there would be this many fights. The final one is purely a design standpoint. It is an engagement belief. The idea that we want our players having something happening to them every 30 seconds. We want pow, pow, excitement, excitement, excitement. There's no reason to stop playing. Get to the next fight, you know? That's sort of the next turn principle. So those are our three ideas behind why there's like all of these little minor fights happening so frequently. We're trying to power level the player both literally and metaphorically. We're trying to set up a thematic of a very dangerous or overrun world, and we're trying to keep the player fully engaged moment to moment to moment. So is there a better way to approach all three of these within the game? You could take out some of the fights and supplement XP with quest rewards. That's true. Once again, though, that doesn't cover the other half of the XP equation, where we want our player getting a lot of experience with their tools, abilities, and whatnot, you know? So how do we keep all of these elements, though, at the same time? How do we let players power level, keep this feeling of a very dangerous and imposing world, and allow for significant, like a very high level of constant player engagement? Because this is like a less than 30-second rate, honestly, at this point. There's almost a fight happening, like even less than every 30 seconds. And if there's not a fight happening, there's at least something much more rapid than that. So we're doing a very rapid engagement. More big monster encounters. That is definitely a way to approach this. That's a way to take out some level of the tedium, is we need a higher level of monster variety, and for that to lean in the direction of greater big monsters. Now, once again, you're not going to see that a lot in the early game, obviously. We can't make things too powerful too quickly in the early game. First change I want to make, I want to establish the areas around cities and villages, towns, everything. The roads immediately around it, like if we say this is a village, I want the road to here, to here, and to here to essentially be a non-engagement zone. Like there won't be any monster encounters right on those. On the city, like I said, at minimum, where these bridges sever it from everything else, is a very easy patrol and defense position. I want to set up very specific safe zones. Now, this is going to take a little bit away from that sense of a dangerous world where when you're close to a city, you're safe there, but we're gonna add a little bit of flavor to that. Is what we're gonna do is we're gonna let monsters like the Saurians, even outside of official quests, attack villages, towns, and whatnot. Time goes on, random event rolls essentially will happen, and like the quest to deal with the Saurians, the goblins, and whatever, occasionally villages will fall or fall under attack by monsters. But when you enter into a zone that should be a safe zone, essentially, it'll become clear that the village is being attacked. And now that raises up the option for you to go into the village intentionally to fight higher level, more difficult, more numbers of those monsters, or to not engage with the attack. And if you don't, then eventually that place is overrun, and now the whole area is a danger area instead of a safe area. And you can now choose to go into that village, try to take it back, essentially. This idea almost like a territory divide. That still leaves the roads open to a lot of ambushes, but lets us feel the sense of the roads are dangerous, civilization is safe, but civilization can be attacked. I think this will help give a better like divide mentality between the areas and give us the, I'm so close to a city, I'm just gonna hoof it. Even if we get an ambush, we're running straight through it. Stronger sense of choice and agency on the player's side, and allows the world to almost feel a little bit more alive. Now, this pulls back from the safety element. The world now feels less wild and dangerous until you start getting into those villages being attacked. That's why I want that, because now you have a place established as safe zone, zones that can become unsafe, I feel like a loss of safety that existed is going to give a stronger sense of danger and wildness than there not being any zone of safety to begin with. I feel like that loss of safety is going to do an even better job of flavoring that feeling of a wild, dangerous world. So now we have safe zones and zones that can eventually be attacked, lost, yada yada. It gives us more of a texture to where events, ambushes, fights can happen. We've also said we want higher variety here in the monsters, whether that's going to be different leaders to the groups. Like if we have more, there's the big hobgoblin we saw. If we could have like caster goblins or other goblin leaders that can show up to give each ambush a higher chance of feeling different from the other ones that are mixed in, you know? That could also be good. Increasing counter visibility and the tools and paths to avoid encounters. That's another thing. I think if you can get a good sense of danger, like, you know, when I was walking to the village and I kept trying to talk to people, there's a lot of people walking these roadways. If someone could let you know, like if you're walking down this road, someone walks past you and say, hey, don't take the southern road, that's been overrun by a minotaur, then that's something where you can know this southern pathway is dangerous and you should probably avoid it. Now, there still might be a goblin ambush on one path. Now you're getting ambushed by goblins with the idea that there was a different fight in a different direction that might have been easier or harder. Even if you couldn't avoid a fight on this journey, now we have a better texture to the feeling of fights. Fights are now something that we have some info for making choices around. Again, adding in a greater level of agency. And the ability to avoid encounters, I think, is also good. Early on, if there's an area where there's only like 3 goblins, and even if you're only like level 2, but you've got like a full party of 4 level 2 people, the goblin's not attacking you right away, and your team not attacking them right away. Both sides kind of square up on the roadside, and then you can choose to back down, essentially. You can choose whether to engage or to back down. Now, that I think is good, because it gives you a way to avoid a fight, try to find a different path to where you're going, where you're not going to be forced into fight after fight after fight after fight. You saw the threat of a fight, and you also get a different feeling between walking into a fight that you see on the road and being ambushed. So now ambush events, I think, gain a lot more importance to them because they now feel less like another encounter on the road I've had 12 encounters on, and this one was actually an ambush. There wasn't the option to back out. This is them trying to kill me. So I think adding that in as a way to like add more texture to those could be really, really good. The first part of the game could be securing a safe zone. Venturing into the wilderness would never be safe. Adding into that, like, yeah, securing a safe zone, knowing that if you get to the end of this roadway, that the roadway is now safe for yada yada time or until yada yada event happens is great. I think being able to get a feeling for some places being safe really brings a greater texture to the dangerous zones. All in all, do we lose anything with this? The number one thing we'd be losing here by creating these safe zones, by making these events, while events now have more texture, we are reducing our amount of interactions per 30 seconds. So how do we boost that back up? How do we make all of these changes but keep that every 30 seconds something is happening to engage the player? There's the first instinct. I don't think this is great, but it's the first instinct is very similar to something I said before. The idea of the rumor mill, essentially. There's a few ways you can handle this. If the player, for example, if you just have a scout bird, you can do it with a bird that occasionally lands and essentially tells you shit. Or you can have peasants running down the road and yelling shit at you about, oh my god, there's a minotaur here. Help, or don't go that way. Or a bird lands on your shoulder. It's got a feather. It's like, oh, that looks like a griffin feather. I bet there's a griffin over in this direction. It's not a great methodology. It feels very forced. It's the type of thing where it's like, oh, okay, I see what they're doing. They're giving me side quests through this methodology. But it's still something where now side quests are coming in at a clip that you can choose to engage with. Adding non-combat encounters is definitely something that'd be interesting. How do we do good non-combat encounters? Well, if villages are now locations that can be safe or dangerous, we can have like encounters with villagers and whatnot moving to new locations. You can find a wagon that is sunk in the mud off to the side, and you can step over and help them for like, you know, a quick 10-second button mashing event of getting the wagon out of the mud. More scenery events could be nice. That could be nice. Occasionally pulling the camera off in the direction of where like a safe village has been overrun. You could see like smoke pluming out in the distance. I feel like there's got to be something. There's got to be something we can add in. Something truly unique. So we're dealing with a lot of monsters. There's this magical world. There's these pawns. What's something a person who's like a monster hunter and it's just walking down the road does? Like something you do in your head. Maybe more party engagement would be fun. Imagine if you almost had road games with your party members, you know? And the same way when a fucking sibling in a car wants to play I Spy with My Little Eye. Imagine if just out of nowhere White Claw just said to you, I spy with my little eye something that is blah blah blah. And then you could choose to ignore them and keep walking. Or you could have your character stop and you could look around and there's a button to point at an object that you think is what your party member is pointed out to. Or they could give you like little riddles or ask you if you know, ooh, here's a good one. Mid-fight with that Saurian, and in a lot of other fights, Punch Buggy, the fighter that knocks out the mage. Beautiful. Nah, that's beautiful. Fucking shit where one of your party members knocks another one down, you gotta go over and help them up and resolve a fucking party fight. But during fights, they're shouting out advice. Like when we were fighting a Saurian at one point, I remember White Claw said, "This one's weak to ice." And while that's useful as a reminder in a fight, I feel like that'd be great little bits of info to be passed on. Like instead of this, it looks like our Arisen's made a party of all women. I wonder what that's about. Oh, my Arisen preferred cap. I don't give a shit. I don't give a shit about your Arisen. I don't need you pointing out that I made a party of all fucking ladies or a party where everyone has a different job. How about you say like, with a party of this collection, we can combine our abilities to do this. Or, hey, did you know that Saurians are weak to ice abilities? Or, hey, Arisen, I know you have this ability. Did you know that I've seen people use it to do this? Because that can be just a little, I think a little more engagement you can do on walks to get a player prepped. Because if the only time I'm going to learn Saurians are weak to ice, essentially, is once I'm already engaged in a fight with Saurians, that's a thing where it's like, well, fuck, I wish I knew that before this moment. Adding in more out-of-combat events in a few different ways, whether it's rumor mill styled events, just scenic events, non-combat events, or information gaining events, especially very simple like your more party engagement shit. I think if we add that in, we could rebump the like 30-second timer between things happening to the player up while maintaining all the other changes we did to make combat encounters feel more intentional, more textured, and like something that you can choose to avoid through a few different methods, whether that's only traveling near safe places or standing down from some fights or whatever else it would be. I think if we could get that sort of the collection of differences, I think could actually make things really interesting.